How can we create the fairest possible world? One of mankind's many dreams is to create a world in which things are as fair as possible, and as many people as possible can lead a good and fulfilling life. But when you think about the major problems of our time, it is difficult to say at first what the really serious problems are. However, there is an umbrella term for this, i.e., the Sustainable Development Goals, which have been defined by the United Nations for the period up to 2030. This defines 17 goals and 169 sub-goals that describe the biggest problems facing humanity worldwide. The 17 major goals are as follows. 1. No poverty. 2. No hunger. 3. Health and well-being. 4. Quality education. 5. Gender equality. 6. Clean water and sanitation. 7. Affordable and clean energy. 8. Decent work and economic growth. 9. Industry, innovation and infrastructure. 10. Less inequality. 11. Sustainable cities and communities. 12. Sustainable consumption and production. 13. Climate protection measures. 14. Life underwater. 15. Life on land. 16. Peace, justice, and strong institutions. 17. Partnerships to achieve the goals. If you want to understand these goals in more detail, just Google Sustainable Development Goals. The important question that now arises is what needs to be done to achieve all of these goals, ideally by 2030. The biggest lever for achieving these goals are laws, and that these laws are actually monitored worldwide, and that non-compliance results in such high fines that it is not financially viable for anyone to break these laws. The problem, however, is that a global subsidiary basic law based on human rights would have to be established worldwide, to which all states worldwide would have to adhere, so that no state would gain a financial advantage for loopholes. Because the problem is that the more sensible laws you establish in a country, the more expensive it often is. If other countries do not introduce these laws, they have a competitive advantage. I will now show you 3 examples of such laws so that you can better visualize this. Example 1. Global subsidiary climate laws. Every year there is a World Climate Conference where people discuss the problems and negotiate clear targets and measures. The problem with this is that these targets are not translated into binding laws, which means that many countries do not adhere to them and gain many economic advantages from this. It would be important to adopt very clear, globally binding subsidiary legislation on climate protection, which all states would then have to adhere to. Example 2. Global subsidiary minimum wage. In many countries around the world, billions of people are very poorly paid and can only make a very poor living from their manual labor. This leads to an enormous number of social problems, such as physical and mental illnesses, refugee movements, wars, etc. Now the question arises, how could a reasonable minimum wage be introduced in all countries around the world? This would require a global law that prescribes that all countries set the minimum wage at 70% of the average income of the population of the respective country, and then automatically redefine it once a year. This would automatically achieve a reasonable minimum wage in every country worldwide. In addition, laws would have to be set globally to ensure that the new minimum wage does not lead to an above-average increase in everyday living costs, such as rent for housing, energy costs, food, etc. Furthermore, it should be the goal of every state that every person has a real opportunity to save 20% of their monthly earnings. In the long term, this would automatically define reasonable minimum wages worldwide every year and systematically enhance the global common good and prevent the gap between rich and poor from widening. Example 3. Global subsidiary taxes. There are individual tax systems and tax laws in every country. As a result, there is global tax competition, and large corporations in particular benefit enormously from this and often manage to pay no or only very low taxes. In a global context, this is reflected in the fact that the working population pays the highest percentage of taxes, and the larger a company becomes, and, above all, the larger it operates internationally, the less tax it usually pays, as it has plenty of opportunities to take advantage of tax structures. Here it would be important to set global red lines, regardless of which taxes are involved, which must not be undercut in percentage terms. If minimum rates were set for every country worldwide for all tax rates, a clear limit would be set on downward tax competition, and these funds could be used to promote the global common good far better worldwide, and, above all, it would also ensure that every country worldwide has enough tax revenue to act as a welfare state to the necessary extent. All in all, we could give an enormous number of examples of which laws could be written down on which topics in a global subsidiary constitution, but that would go beyond the scope of this video. The important thing is that the way human rights have been defined, the global community would be well advised to draw up the broadest possible global basic law based on human rights and thus define more and more sensible minimum standards worldwide and then achieve these as soon as possible. Unfortunately, the problem we currently have is that there is no institution where such laws can be passed at all. Essentially, there is only the United Nations, but it is not empowered to pass global laws of this kind. What many people do not know, because unfortunately it is not taught in history lessons at school, is that from ancient times to the present day, there have been a large number of people in every era who have spoken out in favor of a global democratic world parliament. These included, for example, Diogenes of Sinope, Thomas Paine, David Hume, Voltaire, Gotthold Ephraim Lessing, Christoph Martin Wieland, Friedrich Schiller, Immanuel Kant, Mohandas Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Frank Wedekind, Gerhard Hauptmann, Albert Einstein, Albert Camus, Pope Francis, Ernest Bevin, Thomas Mann, William Fulbright, Rosika Schwimmer, Lola Maverick Lloyd, Gerald Ford, Friedrich von Hayek, Samar Amin, Jürgen Habermas, and many other intellectuals, politicians, scientists, Nobel Prize winners, etc. Since many are afraid that a democratic world parliament would lead to the total surveillance of the entire world, right down to the most private sphere, as well as the abolition of cultural identity and the complete synchronization of the entire world. This is of course a justified fear at first thought and important to express. What is essential, however, is that there is already a transnational elite and institutions that hold the essential systemic strings in their hands, resemble a kind of world government, and primarily enforce their interests through laws in the individual states. It is clear that this is far removed from any kind of democracy, and it must be clearly recognized that this approach does not serve the global common good in the best possible way. If we look at today's global system and examine it from a game theoretical perspective to see whether it can withstand the basest instincts, we must clearly recognize that it was constructed and still functions in such a way that a small elite continues to enrich itself disproportionately, and the general population is exploited beyond measure. Of course, things have changed for the better over the course of history, but if you look at the global figures and what opportunities the global community would have on the basis of modernity, the Sustainable Development Goals could be achieved far more quickly. Now the question arises, how should we actually proceed in order to wake up to a world that is as just as possible in the future, and, above all, to fulfill the Sustainable Development Goals? One could of course give a book-length answer here, but if one wants to reduce it to the essentials, one could give the following answer. On the basis of an institutional system expansion through a global multilateral subsidiary second legal order in the form of a democratic world parliament, an international world court, an international police force, as well as an effective global peacekeeping military, logical universal global multifunctional multilateral subsidiary common good-oriented binding laws in conformity with human rights could be adopted step by step and thus gradually transform the prevailing forms of society, capitalism and communism, into a global interactive multifunctionalism in the long term. What is essential here is that every ism in history was not expedient and was too radically conceived and systemically established in its respective form. If one orients oneself towards the modern economic form of the eco-social market economy, one is well advised to integrate the positive aspects from all worlds of the ism into a society, and to strive for a society that establishes as many laws and systems as possible that bring with them the highest possible degree of multifunctionality. Ideal laws do not primarily create significant advantages for individual states and companies, but rather focus primarily on creating an advantage for as many people as possible. In order for such laws to be conceived and become reality in the future, the The world of tomorrow needs above all 2,000 democratic world parliamentarians who above all think globally systemically, deal with the major issues and problems of the future every day, and look for the best possible solutions every day, and above all try to supplement the best possible laws in the long term in a global basic law that brings with it the highest possible degree of global multifunctionality. Now the legitimate question arises. Why is it so difficult to establish a democratic world parliament? And above all, why is there still no democratic world parliament? To establish a democratic world parliament, you need an assembly of the United Nations and a 2/3 majority in favor of the establishment of a democratic world parliament and the consent of all 5 veto powers, i.e., the United States, Russia, China, the United Kingdom, and France. From a realpolitik point of view, this is very difficult to imagine from today's perspective, because if you consider, for example, that a 2/3 majority of all states worldwide would vote for various laws in the democratic world parliament, and the 5 veto powers and other leading industrialized countries would vote against them, for example, how likely it would be that states worldwide would then actually include this in their legislation. A democratic world parliament would therefore theoretically have the power to dictate binding laws to Joe Biden, Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, etc., or a transnational elite, and significantly curtail their power. This is one of the main reasons why this institution of a democratic world parliament and a global subsidiary constitution has been successfully prevented to this day. However, if we want to develop the world in the best possible way in the future, we need these major global subsidiary laws so that the system is charged with the necessary basic rationality worldwide. Above all, from a game theory perspective, you must realize that if there is no global overarching basic order in the form of the broadest possible global subsidiary basic law based on human rights, there can never be sustainable system functionality on a small scale, i.e., in all individual states, federal states, counties, cities, and villages worldwide, which the current global situation clearly demonstrates in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals. It should be the goal of the global community to establish a second subsidiary legal order in the form of a democratic world parliament, international court of justice, international police, and international peacekeeping forces, where multilateralism is strongly upheld, and in future attempts are made to pass as many global subsidiary laws as possible that serve as many people as possible in a positive way, and above all promote the global common good in the best possible way. Finally, Albert Einstein has repeatedly spoken out in favor of a democratic world parliament. Why did he do this? Because he was hoping for more power, money, or a better position. It is more likely that a physicist is confronted with complex challenges on a daily basis, and that this can also lead to people starting to think about how a global man-made system should be institutionally equipped in order to achieve the best possible results in the future. Which is why Albert Einstein probably came to the conclusion that a democratic world parliament is necessary for the global community in order to create a world that is as fair as possible and that enables as many people as possible to live in peace, freedom, and self-determination. That's it for today. If you liked the video, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. See you next time.